Hey guys, back here with another video looking at the Joseph Stalin's time and power, and he's going to essentially come up with a leadership identity called totalitarianism, and today we're going to look at what that is. Whenever he becomes leader of the Soviet Union, he will essentially take the government and the economy and he'll make them one, so that way the government controls the economy. So essentially a command economy that Stalin will set up is the definition. That's the bullet point. The committee decides how much of what will be made and when. And you can imagine with that kind of a setup, you're going to have a lot of shortages, because now the government is the one telling everybody what needs to be made and when, and essentially you're not listening to the market that the people of the Soviet Union want, and so you're going to have shortage of certain things come up. One thing he will, however, obviously everybody's going to need food, so he sets up these collective farms, and peasants are going to be forced on the collective farms. Doesn't matter if you want to be a farmer or not, you're going to be forced there to work. Collectivization was initially a disaster. The food yields were way down and peasants resisted. The peasants hated this new system. They were tired of being told what to grow and of how much. They were also forced to give up their property, because under Stalin's rule, you're not allowed to own private property anymore. That's part of the communist idea. And then they couldn't sell any excess grain, and they were making less than before. So they were making less money than they were before, and because of this, many of them are going to engage in sabotage. They're going to try and essentially screw up the system and make sure it doesn't work. Many who resisted or were caught sabotaging were resettled into labor camps in distant locations, where about 5 out of every 6 worker will die from the conditions that these camps were. And Stalin also exported grain instead of using it to feed his own people. One of the questions we're going to look at in class is why, but he does it essentially for 2 reasons. One, by giving away extra grain, it makes him look good to the rest of the world, like the Soviet Union is doing really well and has more than enough supplies. And secondly, he uses it to punish people. He uses the people in the Ukraine. Grain is forcibly taken and withheld from people. He uses it essentially as a method of control. If you don't want to listen to me, then you're not going to get any grain to eat. What they're going to call this time the Holodomor. And millions during this time are going to starve on purpose. It's kind of a horrible thing. These children in the picture are essentially victims of this Holodomor because of Stalin wishing to withhold it. And unfortunately, Stalin will also use this as a tool to empty out the Ukraine. He essentially wants to clear out the Ukraine and put his own people there, so that way he can kind of almost redo the Ukraine country and make sure that everybody completely supports him and isn't resistant to him or his ideas. Here are some more pictures. And it wasn't just people that had to suffer, it was also animals. On the left you have people dying of starvation, and on the right you have horses who are also dying of starvation. Here's a little baby starving. Now here's on the left, on the key, you can see the rate of decline of the population in about 4-year period. The darker the color, the greater the population decrease. So the parts of the Ukraine are going to be hit the hardest in terms of population decrease, and then once you get around it, it's less and less. But the central part of the Ukraine is what's going to be hit hardest with this starvation tactic that Stalin's going to use. So the rest of the world doesn't react this way. In fact, Stalin has a lot of people around the world and in the United States even who try and cover for him. One of them is going to be a man named Walter Duranty. He's a reporter for the New York Times. He essentially played down the famine. He was an apologist for Stalin, is what they call it. He just made excuses for Stalin and said that everything was fine, everything was great. He knew the truth, though. He knew exactly what was going on, and he lied about it to the rest of the world. In fact, he will win a Pulitzer Prize for it in 1932, reporting on Joseph Stalin and what was going on. And unfortunately, to this day, the Times has refused to give back the award because of it. And here he is. The things that Walter Duranty will win an award for are called the 5-year plans. This whole idea of collectivization and command economy and planning everything out is part of the 5-year plan. Joseph Stalin was completely jealous of where the United States was technologically and economically. So he decides to create these 5-year plans to get the USSR from where they were to equal to the United States in 5 years. However, they're going to be very harsh. Everybody's going to have a quota. Everybody. Failure to meet it means you're going to be charged with treason, and you're going to be going to what's called the Gulag, and I'll show you what the Gulags are here in a second. It does work for a little bit. This so-called crash industrialization works. However, it caused the famine as well, and we can't know truthfully how successful it was because the only people who had statistics on it were the USSR, and they're going to lie through their teeth about how successful this was. So we don't actually know if it worked or not, or how much it worked, or if it didn't. The economy is built on theft and forced labor. So these gulags, they are essentially Soviet prisons, if you will, kind of like almost concentration camp-ish. The gulags were a thriving enterprise under Stalin. People were sent to the gulag for either common or political offenses. The latter got it the worst. So if you're there for political reasons, then you essentially were going to be harassed by not only the other inmates, but also the guards as well. That's if you made it alive through the whole thing. Conditions were horrible, and many were simply worked to death. When I say the conditions were horrible, I mean that in the literal phrase. They are the worst living conditions that have ever been put on this earth. So, let's talk about him a little bit. When Stalin needs more slave labor, he just simply arrests people. He makes up charges to get people arrested, if need be. At any one time, there's going to be 1 to 3 million people in the gulag. Some estimates have it as 15 to 30 million dying in the camps. But once again, the only estimates we have are from the Soviet Union itself, and we can't particularly trust those numbers. Gulags were also used to populate remote parts of Russia. So essentially, imagine they're going to use these trips to the Gulag to populate different low population areas, make them much more robust, make them have more people in them. You guys, and once again, going along with the common crimes that you may be put away for, this gentleman right here was sentenced to 25 years in prison for writing the word comedy on a secret ballot box. And now the word secret should be in quotes because if it's secret, then nobody should have known who wrote the word comedy. However, the Soviet Union spied on everybody. What's secret? You can never trust it to be secret. Unfortunately, this guy did, and he wrote the word comedy, and there essentially was arrested and put away for 25 years in a gulag. And now, by the way, I might add that there's only one person who was allowed to be on the ballot box, and take a wild guess as to who that is. Gulags continue. The population will go up and down. It decreases during World War II because many of them were emptied and sent to the front lines, simply to serve as cannon fodder. When they were sent to the front lines, they were not given any weapons or armor or even nice clothes. They were sent in their Gulag uniforms and then pretty much sent to the front lines to die. However, after World War II is over, they will pick up again. Prominent people from Eastern Europe were sent there. Soviets who were prisoners of war in Germany were sent there because they were seen as failures in the Soviet military. Even survivors of Nazi concentration camps, even many Jewish people who survived those concentration camps were thrown in the gulags because they disagreed with Joseph Stalin. So they pretty much traded a Nazi concentration camp for a Soviet gulag. And then every red dot is a gulag, just to give you a rough idea of how many there are. And some pictures of how gulags were set up and what the people would be doing. So these weren't the only things that Stalin did while he was in office. He was also in charge of what's called the Great Purge, or some people call it the Great Terror. This will happen in the late 1930s, and Joseph Stalin seeks to consolidate all power within himself. So he's going to try and wrangle up all the people who disagree with him or any potential threats, and he's going to arrest them. He's going to execute many of them. He's going to send those to the gulags, and he's essentially going to do this using a fake trial system. Evidence is going to be made up, corrupted, tampered with, whatever you want to call it, and he's essentially going to throw them away for life, if he's not going to kill them. He purges the party ranks. Many of the people who survived and lived with the original Russian Revolution are going to be thrown in the gulags or killed because he wants to make sure that he's the only one with power. Grand total of 1,108 were arrested and killed or died out of the 1,966 delegates that will start the Communist Party. Now, once again, according to some Soviet statistics, between 1937 and 1938, over 1.5 million people were arrested. Over 600,000 of them were shot, roughly 1,000 people per day. Now, even these numbers may be low because, once again, the Soviet Union, or the KGB as they're called, are likely to alter their figures, make themselves look not as bad as they were. Some estimates put that execution toll around 1.7 million. And if you lived and went to the gulags, you most likely were going to die in the gulags. So that 1.7 million does not include people who died in the gulags. That's only people who were executed when they were arrested. And it's carried out by this guy right here. Some pictures of Joseph Stalin when he was a young man, as he gets a little bit older. The one on the right is before he becomes leader, when he's still working with Vladimir Lenin. The one on the left is when he's actually in charge of the USSR. And as you can see, definitely one of history's greatest monsters, if not the worst of the worst. Also happens to be Time Magazine's Man of the Year in 1939. If that wasn't insulting enough, he will also be made Time Magazine Man of the Year in 1942 as well. Alright guys, until next time, that is Joseph Stalin. But until next time, we will start with Italy. I will talk to you guys later. Bye.